All right, so good morning, everybody. My name is Jesse, and I'm with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. I know we've got some new folks joining us here today. So, if you are new, we're all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms and homes around the world. If you're not new and you're an old pro at this, well, then welcome back as we dive in with our epic month of biodiversity. This is our first program of the month. We are doing a whole slew of amazing biodiverse programs from now till the end. We've got our big Global Biodiversity Festival, the third weekend of the month, the biggest thing we've ever done. And as many of our live classes will know today too, we are diving in with our Backyard Bio Global Nature campaign. So if by the end of this talk, you're inspired to go out and explore some wildlife near you, well, then we've got just the program for you. Now, today we are bringing in a speaker for the very first time, a friend of mine and a colleague in Canadian science communication, Dr. Kaylee Byers, and she is a wildlife health scientist, which is a really broad term and can encompass a lot of things, but she is going to dive in today on a really interesting creature, a creature that a lot of us might be a little bit squeamish about, a little bit skittish around. We are going to learn about what it's like to be a rat detective and understand more about these sort of urban creatures that we share our home with a little bit, maybe not that we want to be sharing our homes with, but they certainly are a fascinating creature, and I'm really excited to dive in. I hope you guys are too. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Byers. So Kaylee, thank you so much for joining us, and take us away.
Thank you so much, Jesse. It's delightful to be here. Yes, perhaps not in our homes, but outside. It's a nice place to see rats. So as Jesse said, I'm a wildlife health scientist. I specifically study wildlife health, wildlife disease, in an effort to make sure that animals and people are all healthier together. And today I'm going to be talking to you specifically about rats. So I'm a rat detective. I spend a lot of time studying city rats, and we're going to learn a little bit today about rats, what they are, maybe some fact checking about some things we think of when we think about rats, and I'll tell you a little bit about my research and how you can be a rat detective too. So I'm an urban ecologist. Ecology is studying the relationships between living things, and I do that in cities. So that makes me an urban ecologist. And I do my work here in Vancouver. So this is a map of Canada. I'm all the way over here on the coast. It's a beautiful city right on the water. And I specifically study rats. And when we think about cities, maybe we don't think of them as particularly wild places, but cities are full of wildlife, from the birds like pigeons and eagles to insects like butterflies and ants, and the mammals that I personally love so dearly, raccoons, which are one of my favorite animals. You might even see my raccoon pillow in the background, and squirrels. So there are so many different kinds of animals and wildlife that live in our cities. They're truly wild places. And of the animals that live in cities, one that we come into contact with in cities all over the world is rats. Rats are pretty much everywhere. They followed us as we've moved across the globe. They live really close to us in our cities, in our backyards, and they could even be living right underneath our feet, and we wouldn't really even notice them. So rats are all over the place. And rats are a part of a group of animals called rodents. Now, rodent means to gnaw. Gnawing is a little bit different than chewing. Gnawing is continuously biting. And that's because rodents have these teeth at the front of their mouths that grow continuously. So that's sort of what brings them all together as a group. There's over 2,000 species of rodents. And in fact, rodents make up 40% of mammals. So that is a lot of different species. So if we're talking about, diversity, rodents are doing pretty good. There are 64 species within this group of rattus. So when we're talking about rats, we're often talking about rattus. I'm going to show you 2 in a second, but 64 of those, over 2,000 species, are in this group of rattus. So in cities, you might come into contact in North America with 2 species of rats. One, Rattus rattus, and the other Rattus norvegicus. Now those are pretty long names, but those are the scientific names that we use for those rats all over the world. So the first Rattus rattus is also called the black rat or the roof rat. And the other rat, Rattus norvegicus, is also called the brown rat or the Norway rat. So those are more of the common names that we would often use for them. People also call brown rats sewer rats. That's another one you might have heard of. So how do you tell these 2 species apart? Well, you might think that the trick is in the color, right? They're called black rat and brown rat, and I showed you pictures where one is darker and one is lighter. And that's true, they often are different colors, but not all the time. Sometimes black rats are a little bit more brown, sometimes brown rats are a little bit darker in color. So you can't necessarily tell the two apart based on color alone. Black rats tend to have bigger ears than Norway rats, so that's another trick you can use. And black rats also have longer tails. So if you were to be holding a rat, like I have done many times, and taken the tail of the rat and pulled it back up towards the rat's head, for a black rat, that tail would actually kind of go past the head. So it's a long tail. For Norway rats, we wouldn't see that. So the tail, for me, is my number one trick for telling apart the roof rat from the Norway rat. You'll also often see them sort of living different lifestyles. Black rats tend to be running along wires and trees and fences. They tend to be up a little bit higher. And brown rats are the rats we tend to think of burrowing down into the ground, running along our alleyways. So that can be a difference too. But two species of rats in our cities across North America. Okay, fact check. I've just told you about rats. They're rodents. There's many different species in this rattus group. What about bats? Are rats and bats the same? That's something I hear quite a bit. Rats are just bats without wings, or bats are just rats with wings. I'll give you a second to think. Are bats and rats the same? Well, they might look similar, but they are not the same. So bats and rats have been separated for a really long time. Actually, some research shows that bats might be more related to primates than they are to rodents. So they're not that closely related at all, even though they sort of look similar. But what's really interesting is that I told you that rodents are that biggest group of mammals. Bats are actually the second largest group of mammals. They make up about 20% of all mammals. So another really interesting group that maybe Jessie can find you an expert to talk about at another time. Bats are fascinating. Okay, why do rats do so well in cities? Why do they thrive in cities? Well, there's a few reasons why rats do so well in cities. One, they followed us all over the world on our ships and on our trains and our trucks, and so they kind of go wherever we go. And cities are really dense places with lots of people, and those people are eating delicious food, and we're throwing our garbage outside. We've got lots of restaurants, and so there's lots of food waste for rats to eat. And rats will eat pretty much anything. So if there's food for rats, they're going to be eating it. Rats will also stay really close to their food source, so they don't have to travel that far if there's food nearby. Rats can also make a home pretty easily. So you might be walking along and see just a little bit of dirt on the side of the road. Well, rats just need a little bit of dirt to burrow down and make their home. So rats will burrow down into the ground and make a nest, and often groups of rats will burrow down and make a group of nests under the ground. They'll make little escape routes so they can get out. So they don't need that much space. They just kind of burrow right down into the ground. So here you see a little rat poking its head out from around the corner. It just can dig right down in there and make itself a home. And they don't need that much space to raise a family. So a pair of rats can have a litter of, say, 5 to 12 babies, somewhere around there, generally about 7. And all they need is about the size of a basketball in order to do that. So they don't need much space. They can burrow down into a little bit of soil and make a home. They eat about anything. And there's food everywhere in cities, which is why they do so well. Now let's talk about the baby thing for a second. Let's say you have a pair of rats, just one pair, and they have, let's say, 10 offspring, but generally somewhere around 5 to 7. Sometimes there's one paper that found like over 20. It was a lot. Exception. But there are a lot of babies that they can have. In a year, you can have one pair of rats ending up to be 1,000 rats in just 1 year. So you don't need that many rats in order for you to quickly have a lot of rats. So that's another reason they do well in cities. So why do we need rat detectives? Why do we need people to study rats? Well, rats are, they can be an important part of ecosystems. They eat seeds. They can move them around the environment. They also serve as food for other animals, so they can be important that way. But rats can also cause quite a bit of damage. So if they get into our homes, they can gnaw on wires, they can gnaw on the buildings themselves, so they can cause some damage that way. They can also make us sick. So rats can carry bacteria and viruses that can be spread to people that can make us sick. So it's really important that we study rats, where they are, and the diseases they carry, so we can make sure that our cities are healthy for people and animals. Bacteria, what? So rats can carry a number of different bacteria and viruses that can make people sick. And those bacteria and viruses can be found in the poop, the urine, and even the fleas that live on rats. So there's a lot of different bits and pieces of those rats that you can come into contact with that can potentially carry these bacteria and viruses that can make you sick. Which is why when we're looking at rats, we don't want them in our homes. We want to stay away from them and look at them from a distance. So I'm a rat disease detective, which means I study those diseases carried by rats. And what's interesting is that the rats themselves don't really get sick at all. It's just when those bacteria and viruses go to people that people can get sick. So here I am trapping some rats, and I've got them over top of some trays so that I can collect their poop and their urine to test them for diseases. And you'll notice I'm wearing some very thick gloves to catch those rats later. So this is what it looks like. I would trap rats, I would take them and I would make them go to sleep for a little while to take samples, like collect the fleas, the urine, and the poop. And then I would put those rats back right where I caught them, and I would follow those rats and see where they go. So we would trap rats, see what diseases they carry, and then we would track those rats to see where they were going and where they were moving over time. Because rats and how far they go also depends or also affects how they're going to spread those bacteria in the environment. So we want to know how far they go to know how big the problem is. And I couldn't bring all those rats to a lab. That's because it would take too long to drive them to the university, and also it would really stress the rats out for being out of their home for that long. So I had a van that I turned into a lab to do all of this research. So this is the rat lab van. Now, I was just talking to you about the diseases carried by rats and how we need to be really careful when we're near them. And so because I was holding rats and handling them, it was really important that I do a number of things to keep myself safe. So here I am all dressed up for carrying or catching rats. This little rat's asleep at the moment. And I want you to think about what things that I have on that are keeping me safe. I'll give you a second to think about it. Okay, here's a few things that I've got on. I've got glasses. Now, I wear very stylish glasses anyway, but if I wasn't wearing glasses, I would still be wearing something like goggles to keep my eyes safe. I wear a special mask, so we're all wearing masks now all the time, but these masks are even, they're a little bit more special scientific masks to keep viruses from getting in. I wear gloves when I'm handling the rats. So when I'm taking samples, I wear thin gloves so that I'm not touching the rat directly, but so that they're easier to handle. When I'm wrangling rats, I wear those very thick gloves in case they happen to bite me. And then I wear long sleeves to help myself from getting scratched by rats. So lots of special things that I need to have in order to do the research that I do. So all the research that I've done, what we found is that rats do carry bacteria here in Vancouver that can make people sick, but that where those rats are that carry those bacteria really depends on where they are. So not all rats carry them. Only some rats in some areas carry them, and rats don't seem to move that far, so they can't spread their bacteria. So your neighborhood rat is really your neighborhood rat. It doesn't move all that far, and it carries different bacteria than rats somewhere else. So really your local neighborhood rats. Okay, fact check. I've caught a lot of rats, and something I hear a lot is rats are so big. I saw a rat that was the size of a house cat. So we're going to play a little bit of a game here, and I'm going to have you guess at what size rats are. Are they actually the size of a house cat? So I'm showing you a couple of vegetables and fruit, and my cat Gizmo. And I'm going to tell you how much each one of these things weigh, and then I'm going to have you take a second and guess about how heavy you think rats are. So, avocado, about 170 grams. Okay, think about how big an avocado is. It's about 170 grams. A head of broccoli might be 500 grams, so quite a bit heavier. A cantaloupe, a full, delicious cantaloupe, 1,360 grams. Okay, so we're getting quite a bit heavier. Finally, my house cat, Gizmo, 4,082 grams. She's about 9 pounds when I took this photo. So, thinking about all these weights from 170 grams to 4,000 grams, where do we think a rat would fall? I'll give you a second.
And while they're thinking, I just want to note our live classes can type in the chat bar, and our classes on YouTube can type in the chat bar on YouTube. We can get a bit of an answer from some of our teachers. I don't know. I think the cat might be a little too big personally, but I'm not sure. We're going to see what the audience says today and discuss it. Let's see. Don't be shy. Feel free to type in the chat, guys.
Yeah.
They're hedging their bets, I think. We've got other questions coming through. They're just skirting this entirely. 500. We've got 500 from Lucas. Okay. Our first dive in. Avocado, broccoli. We got cantaloupe. We got all three. We've got 3 different classes with 3 different answers. No one has gone in on the cat so far, though.
Great.
So that's where we'll leave it. Tell us.
That's excellent. So we are on the money with avocado and broccoli. So that rat falls somewhere between avocado and broccoli. So rats, when they're younger, of course, are smaller, so they weigh less. So I've caught lots of rats that are about 100 grams, so smaller than an avocado. The biggest rat I've ever caught was about 450 grams. So not quite 500, but it was a big rat. Most of the rats I caught are somewhere between 200 to 300 grams. So rats, not the size of house cats. Now, sometimes when you see a rat and it's scared, you might think it's bigger than it actually is because they puff up their fur and they arch their backs because they're scared and they want you to back away from them. So they might look bigger than they actually are, but it's really just all fluff. Okay, so how can you be a rat detective? You don't need to handle rats to be a rat detective. And remember, we don't want to touch rats because they can carry things that can make us sick. So we can actually look at rats from a distance and do a little detective work to see where they're going and who they are. So this is what you can look for. You can look for holes in the dirt. Like I was saying, they can burrow down into the holes. So here we've got a hole right here in a bush. That's a rat hole if ever I saw one. So you can look for rat holes like that. There's some in here too. There's one down here. So you can look for holes in the dirt. Another place you can look is next to fences, or I've seen quite a few of them next to phone posts. All you need is a crack in the pavement for a rat to get in and burrow down under the ground. Another thing you can look for, which takes a little bit more attention to detail, is rat runs. So they'll leave their home here in the upper left, and you can see a little runway where rats can run. So they run the same paths day after day, and because of that, they wear those paths down with their little feet. So you can look for those worn paths as signs that rats were there. You often will see these too along fences or along walls because rats also like to run next to walls or something flat like that because it's protection. It's one more side that they don't have to worry about a predator eating them. So you can also look along fences and along walls as a sign for rats. Cracks between buildings can also allow for rats to hide. So here's a cute little rat photo that we took of a rat in between some buildings. So you can also look between buildings as a sign for rats. But most importantly, you want to go where the food is. Like I said, rats can eat just about anything. They want to eat lots of delicious food, and that's a great place to look for them. So I'm going to show you this little video now of some rats that I took in my research area here. And I want you to see if you can count how many rats there are. You can see them running around. This one's not sure where it's going. It's going to go up and down that pole. Keep your eye on the dumpster. Whoa. Whoa. Okay. Now, I've watched this video a lot of times, and I have no idea how many rats there are. But something that is quite interesting that I noticed while watching it the other day is if you can see this little rat here, I actually think this might be a black rat and all the other rats are Norway rats. You notice it's a little bit darker in color. It's got a nice long tail. So it looks like one among a bunch of Norway rats. Now these rats here are quite large. Those ones are probably 400 to 450 grams. So that gives you an idea of the biggest rat that I've caught. Another thing to do when you're looking for rats is thinking about timing. Timing is everything. Rats are active at night, but they're most active when night is starting and when night is ending, so dusk and dawn. So if you're sitting inside looking out at a dumpster in an alley or something like that, that's a great time to look for rats because that's when they're most active, dusk and dawn. Okay, so I've told you about how you can look for rats, but how can rat detectives help? Like we said, we don't really want rats in our homes because they can carry diseases and they can do damage. So we really want to be able to manage rats. But a lot of the way that we manage rats right now isn't really helping. We do things like killing rats, we put out poisons for rats, but that doesn't really manage rats because it only deals with some rats. And like we said, rats can have lots of babies. And because poison in the environment gets into other animals too. Remember that rats are eaten by lots of other animals. And so if there's poison in rats, and other animals eat those too. So those really aren't a very good solution in the long term. Instead, what we need to do is think about how we can manage the spaces that we live in to deal with rats. So one thing that we can do is tidy up our green spaces. So here on the left, that's not actually a rat. It is an adorable rodent. But what I'm showing you is that we've got loose leaf litter. They like to hide next to hedges. So if we can clean up our backyards and clean up that loose leaf litter, that's one way to keep rats from getting near our home. If you see cracks on the outside of your house or your home, you can talk to an adult and maybe they can try to fill those in. So those holes are how rats can actually get into the spaces we're living in. But the most important thing we can do is be good about our waste. So making sure that we put our waste away in garbage bins that are sealed. So here we've got some garbage bins that are overflowing with garbage. They're not really closed. Rats can get into those really easily. So we want to make sure they're closed nice and tight and that we don't have overflowing garbage. If you notice that you've got lots of rats around, sometimes it can also be other food sources like bird feeders. So sometimes we have to take those down too, because that's another source of food for rats. So really thinking about how we are tidy in our own spaces can help keep rats out of our homes. And ultimately, all of this is important because it helps create healthy ecosystems. Remember, there's wildlife everywhere in cities, and all that we can do to help keep that environment healthy for them will help create a healthy environment for all of us. So if you're interested in urban ecology, which I hope that you are, there's a fantastic book coming out by Dr. Sailita Guy in the fall called Chasing Bats and Tracking Rats, Urban Ecology, Community Science, and How We Share Our Cities. This book tells the stories of urban ecologists doing different kinds of research. I'm here on the cover. You can read a story about the first rat that I ever caught. Dr. Sailita Guy is over here. Dr. Sailita Guy studies bats. So there's stories about bats, coyotes, bees, lots of different cool stories about urban ecology. So I'll leave that as a place to learn more. And with that, I'll be happy to take any of your questions.
Fantastic, Kaylee. What fun was that? We'll leave that up for a few more minutes. Sailita is a friend of mine we've always wanted to have on the broadcast. Hopefully we can nab her in the coming months as well. But let's stick with rats. That was super exciting. What an amazing presentation and so many classes, both live and on YouTube, joining us. Well over 150 kids tuning in for content. So welcome in, guys. Yeah, we're going to dive in with questions. So if you're on YouTube and you're a classroom teacher, please do share your questions there. We'll take as many as we can. But we are going to start going to New York, to Miss Cottrell's class, grade 5 class, joining us there. Miss Cottrell, if you want to kick us off, unmute your mic and come on in.
I do, thanks. Hi, Kaylee. You know, probably the question that I'm hearing the most on my end is, how did you get into wanting to investigate about rats? So I'm going to have Rex, I'm going to see if I can do this. They'll put the camera on Rex here. I don't know if you can see him.
Hi, Rex.
He's going to ask his question. Go ahead, Rex.
How did you get into liking rats and being a rat detective?
That's a really great question, Rex. So I actually have always been really interested in animals, and I'm really interested in the diseases that animals carry because I want to make sure that we live in healthy environments with animals and we also keep them safe. And rats were just a really great animal to study because they're in our cities and because they're everywhere. And so I studied rats because they were a really good fit for the research that I wanted to do. And you know what's really surprising, Rex, is that actually, although there's so many rats in cities, we don't know that much about them, which is surprising. We probably know more about polar bears than we know about rats. So there was also lots of research to do. Great question.
Great question, Rex. Thanks so much, man. All right, let's head to Mr. Patrick's class. If you want to turn on your devices, they're joining us grade 7s in London, Ontario. Mr. Patrick, take us away.
Hi there. I have a question from Lila, and she wants to know how many years of schooling does it take to become a rat detective?
Oh, great question. So after high school, I did an undergraduate degree, so that's about 4 years. And then I also did a master's. Now, these days, I don't think you necessarily have to do a master's, but you could dive right in. So I'd say it took about 4 years of undergraduate to get into research. And then my PhD was another 7 years. Now, I did a lot of stuff, and that's not necessarily how long a PhD is for everyone. But it can take, let's say, another 9 years of school to come out with being a rat detective.
And I always like to highlight this because kids often ask how you get into things, what the educational background is, and it seems really daunting when you're in grade 4 and you're thinking, wow, grade 12, and then so many years after that. But at the end of that, you're still really young and you get to do something that's really fulfilling and exciting for the rest of your life, collaborate with people around the world, do really cool science, and share it with people like you in the future. So I always like highlighting that it's worth the extra school. It's not for everybody, but if you're really keen on it, it is an absolutely fantastic opportunity to learn a lot and make a lot of neat colleagues. So very cool. Ms. Crusader's class, you guys figured out your tech. Welcome in. Toronto grade 2s. Let's hopefully it works and share away.
Thank you. Radhika would like to know what rats can do with its paws.
Oh, what they can do with their paws? That's a really good question. So rats, I mean, they can pick up food in their environment. You often see them gnawing on food, so they keep it right close to their little mouths. So they use their paws for that. And they're also quite good at climbing. So in that video that I showed, it's always surprising to me. There are those 2 huge rats climbing up the side of that dumpster. And every time I look at it, I'm like, how do they do that? And there's just like a thin, almost like a little wire almost that runs through the inside that they climb up. So they're quite dexterous and able to use them for climbing and for eating. Yeah. Great question.
Great question, guys. We're whipping through these. This is great. I'm going to go to Miss Carr in Brampton next, and then Mr. Lilly and Candace to wrap up our first round of questions. So Miss Carr, just unmute your microphone and come on in. Hi.
Hi there, everybody. I have Muskan who has a question. Muskan, please go ahead.
Why are rats dangerous and how do they get in your house?
What was the first part of that question? I heard, how did they get in your house?
Yes.
And I think she has a question. Why do rats have big tails?
Okay.
Oh, great question. Okay. So rats can get into your house if there's holes and cracks on the outside of the house that you can get in, or also if you just leave your door open. That's a great way for anything to get into your house. I had a cat come into my house once because I had the door open. So that's a way that they can get into your house. Rats have long tails. They help them balance. So those tails help them move along. As I was saying, black rats will run along fence posts and things. It helps them balance. That tail also helps them cool down. So they've got that long, scaly tail, which has a few hairs on it, but not a lot of hairs. That actually also helps them regulate their temperature. So their tail is really important for balance and temperature regulation. Great question.
How cool was that? We've had a few Canadian classrooms in a row. Let's head back to the U.S. Also, Atomi, Candace, Mr. Lilly's grade 3 class. Just unmute your microphone, guys, and come on in. In fact, all our teachers can leave your mics unmuted. That's how StreamYard works. So keep those unmuted. It'll be much easier. Hi there.
Hi, this is Zariah.
Hi, Raya.
When did you start studying rats?
Great question, Araya. So I started studying rats in 2013, so almost 8 years ago now. And I finished my PhD a year ago. So I was in my PhD studying rats for 7 years, but I'm still working on them because I like them so much.
Great question, guys. All right, we are going to do another round with all our live classes, so hold tight onto those questions. I'm going to head to YouTube for a minute and see if we got some there. In fact, Miss Terry Arnold wants to know, how can rats digest anything like garbage? Like, what are they, they're eating these like wild things. What's going on, Kaylee?
Oh my gosh, that is a really good question. Well, rats are able to eat lots of different things. So they're omnivorous like we are, so they can eat lots of different foods anyway. They won't purposefully eat, say, the plastic and things around the food, though they will pull that plastic down into their nests, for example, so they can use it that way. I'm not familiar with any specific or special metabolism that they have, though I will say there was a new study that came out not that long ago talking about special metabolism that rats could have for their pizza eating diets, but I'm not really familiar with all that research. But certainly being an omnivore helps.
Yeah, I have a special metabolism for my pizza eating diet as well.
You probably do.
No scientific papers on that, unfortunately. All right, a few more quick ones from YouTube. Miss Waldron's class wants to know, what's the difference between rats and mice? You compared rats to one another, but is there a big one between these two?
Yeah, one of the big differences between rats and mice is the size. So rats tend to be larger, mice tend to be quite a bit smaller, and they have those bigger ears. But a big difference between the two of them is size.
Excellent. There you go, guys. Great questions. What have we got? Anything else that really jumps out? We got about pets. So just various questions on having rats as pets, developing allergies to rats. So if you have rats in your home, is that a good idea? Is it something that can lead to bad outcomes? I don't know.
So you can definitely get pet rats. I think there's only one place. I don't even know if you can't get them. In Alberta, I don't know if you can actually have pet rats, but you can get pet rats. They're great pets. They're really they're really smart. You want to make sure you clean their cages regularly so they don't get too smelly, but that's like with any pet. People can develop allergies to them. So people who work in labs with lab rats and lab mice can develop allergies. That can also happen with other animals too. So being continuously in that environment with them. But rats can be really great pets. They're really smart. You just have to know how to take care of them.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the Alberta thing. So for our classes that might not know, Alberta is famous in Canada and in some places around the world for not having any rats. Like in the entire province, in theory, they've gone on a major eradication campaign, which you might know a little bit more about, Kaylee, so please do share.
That's a good fact check. That's a good fact check. So Alberta does have rats, but it has many fewer rats. So the rat-free status means that they don't have breeding populations of rats. So they have a few rats, but many fewer of them. And Alberta definitely does invest in a thorough rat management campaign. So they put the money into it to track rats and make sure they address them when they find them.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you for the fact check. Miss C's class, let's go back to New York. Come on back in. Take us away, guys.
Hi, I think Kaylee's up next. Kaylee, you want to ask your question? Let me pin you here. Hold on. Okay, go ahead, honey.
How many types of rats are there around the world, and what are the most common rats that you see?
Great question, other Kaylee. So in that group of Rattus, with that scientific name, there's about 64. But there are many, many species of rats. The most common ones that you do see, especially in our cities, are the Norway rat and the roof rat. So those two we tend to see the most. And it depends on where you are. In some cities, you'll see many more Norway rats. So I see lots of Norway rats here. And in other cities, you might see more of the roof rats. So it also depends on where you are, which one you see more often. Great question.
Great question, guys. All right, Mr. Patrick's class, come on back in, turn on that camera, and you're good to go.
We have a question about, you mentioned that rats are often prey, but are rats ever predatory?
Great question. So rats will eat like insects and things like that. You'll see them munching on those sorts of things. So they can be predatory, and they're also opportunistic. So if there's food lying around, they'll go for that. But generally, they'll probably just eat things that they can be sure that they can get. I don't know if, especially in cities where there's lots of food available to them, they probably don't have to be predatory as often as they might have to elsewhere. But that's a really good question.
Fantastic. Guys, this has been great. We're like the fastest Q&A period of all time. Miss Crusader's class, come on back in. Go for it.
Hi. Okay, we have a question from Moshi, and he is asking, if rats get so big, how do they fit into these tiny little cracks?
Great question. Yeah, so rats can fit into really small spaces. I've read that a rat just needs about the size of a quarter or about anything the size of its head. And it just has a really flexible body. So as long as its little head can get in there, its body is really flexible and it can get through those spaces. And that's also another reason why that hairless tail is really beneficial, because if you're getting through small spaces, if you're in areas that are really dirty, like sewers, having fur on that tail can make things a little bit more complicated. It can get caught, it can get really dirty. So that hairless tail can also help there too.
I love the hairless thing. One of my other favorite things in nature is you'll see vultures have that, head with no feathers on it. It's because they burrow their head into dead bodies. And so you don't want to get all that blood and sinew and gore on your neck. So if you have just skin, it's much easier to clean and keep clean. Cool question to segue into that, guys. All right, we've got two questions on YouTube that are along the same lines from Miss Stevens' class in Owen Sound and Miss Terry Arnold's class. So they want to know, why do rats, what diseases do rats have? Aren't they affected by the diseases they carry? Are they not affected by the diseases they carry? What's going on with them?
I love this question. Okay, this is my bread and butter for questions. So rats carry lots of different diseases that can make people sick. And for the most part, they themselves don't seem to get sick. One disease does make rats very sick and it kills them. And that one is the plague. So that's probably one that you've heard about before. And that's the one we tend to associate with rats. And it's actually the fleas that live on rats that can give it to people. It's not the rats themselves. So that's one that will kill the rats. But there are many other things that they carry that can make people sick that the rats don't seem sick from. So one that I'll tell you about is called leptospira. So leptospira is a bacteria found all over the world. Over 1 million people get leptospira every year. And you can get it from rat urine. So the urine has the little leptospira bacteria that go into the environment. If you're out walking around and you've got cuts on your feet, or if you happen to get it near your eyes or in your mouth, you can get it and you can get sick and you can have what looks like a flu. So you'll often see people getting leptospira, say if there's been flooding and there's lots of water in the area and you happen to come into contact with rat urine in that water. Now, leptospira, because it's a bacteria, you can take an antibiotic and get better, but the rats themselves don't really seem to get sick at all.
We can tell that was your favorite question.
I'm like, oh, disease.
Miss Carter's class, come on in, unmute that mic. And if you ask the question you shared in the chat, I'm really curious the answer. Come on in, guys.
I have a question about rats. How many bones do they have?
No pressure, Kaylee.
Oh my gosh, I have no idea how many bones they have. That is a really great question for Google. No idea. Jesse, quick.
I can try. Bones of rats. I'll try and get that for the next one if we can. Certainly, we're 206. Yes, it's been a long time since we even thought about bones people. See, we're not bone people. Miss Carr, we'll come back to you. We'll figure it out. But another question. You know what? Because we don't know the answer to that one offhand, do you have any other questions from your class before we go to Mr. Lilly to wrap up?
I'm going to pick Shruti for a question. Shruti, go ahead, please. Unmute and talk, Shruti. Shruti, unmute and talk. You're still muted.
This is half the fun of video calls. People have to stay muted for quite some time. Otherwise, it's no fun.
My question is that can rats swim?
Ooh.
Can rats swim? Shruti, that is a great question. Yes, they can swim. I'm not sure how long they can swim for, but they're quite good at swimming. And actually, there's even some stories of rats swimming in sewers, and there have even been a couple stories of rats coming up through toilets. Now, I've never heard of that actually happening here, but I have heard of it happening in Seattle, for example. I don't think it happens all that often, but they can swim.
Seattle Tourism Board is cursing you from afar. Rat bones. Number of bones in a rat, 223, which is 17 more than a human, 206. Nice job, guys. Mr. Lilly's class, come on in. Wrap us up with one last question. This has been great. You go for it.
This has been.
I'm wondering, have you ever got sick?
Great question, Ben. I have never gotten sick from a rat. So I do lots and lots of things to keep myself safe when I'm handling rats. And I also make sure that I get all my vaccines so that I don't have to worry about getting sick. But it definitely takes a lot of care to be safe when handling them to make sure that I don't get sick. That's a really great question.
That is a great question. Thanks so much, buddy. And by the way, I want to I have to laugh at the chat bar on YouTube and in the thing. So many kids were like, Googled that instantly. So there's like 223 like several times. So way to go to all our friends on YouTube and live. Kaylee, this has been so much fun. I want to highlight a few things that classes can do to keep the learning going. You mentioned 2 other topics and scientists that I want to share for people. Dr. Sailita Guy, bats, parasites, urban ecology. She's amazing. We're hopefully going to have her on the broadcast next year. And if you want to learn more about bats, which you highlighted early in your session, Kristen Lear is our best bat person that we've had on the broadcast. We've done many programs with her, so check that out for anyone. But of course, we're here for Kaylee today, and if you want to learn more about her, KayleeByers.com. Great social media, all sorts of amazing science communication. Kaylee rocks, as you guys can tell. Certainly the feedback on the YouTube has been that way, which is awesome. And our kids at home, if you guys are keen to go explore local wildlife near you, whether that's rats or cats or cantaloupe-sized rats or anything else that you can find out there, backyardbio.net. #backyardbio. Share whatever you guys find throughout the month, and we'd love to see it. Kaylee, this has been awesome. Is there any last message you want to leave kids with to take home with on rats, how cool they are, what they can do to keep learning going? Anything that you'd like?
Well, it's Backyard Bio Month, so just keep your eyes peeled on in those tight little spaces along walls and things and near dumpsters or garbage, and see if you can spot any of those scurrying little critters around. You might even hear them before you see them. So keep your eyes and ears open.
Fantastic. Kaylee, thank you so much. And what we do at the end of every broadcast, I'm going to bring in all our live groups to say a big thank you and goodbye. So Ms. Cottrell, Mr. Patrick, Mr. Shader, Ms. Carr, and Mr. Lily's class, welcome in. Thank you guys so much, and have a wonderful